Well, if you're wondering why farmers are so concerned about their farm finances right now, they really just can't catch a break. It's not just because corn prices are below break even for most. It's the fact input prices are so high.
The U.S. has lost the corn crown. We've been the world's top exporter of corn for just about every single year in history.
In the wake of escalating trade tensions, Alberta finds itself caught in the crossfire of U.S. tariff threats, with the energy sector, its largest export to the U.S., remaining central, but beef and dairy producers also now facing potentially serious risks. The recent sharp rhetoric and protectionist moves by the Trump administration have left Alberta's agri-food sector bracing for disruption, while many producers anxiously weigh their options and prepare for a future that may require fundamental reorientation. Though the U.S. remains Alberta's dominant export market, comprising about $9.3 billion of agri-food sales in the last year alone, the uncertainty triggered by these tariffs has many industry leaders expressing disappointment and deep concern. The impacts are felt most acutely in Alberta, where half the nation's beef production resides and a significant portion of dairy also originates. At the heart of the latest dispute lies the U.S. claim that Canada slaps up to 300% tariffs on American dairy, with President Trump using these figures to justify threats of severe retaliation. However, the truth is more nuanced. While tariffs exceeding 200%, and for some products nearly 300%, do exist, they are only applied once imports surpass strict quotas established under the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. These tariff-rate quotas allow limited duty-free access for U.S. dairy, but if exporters breach the cap, the penalties are punishing, such as a 298% tariff on butter and around 245% for most cheeses. In most years, U.S. dairy exports stay within quota limits, meaning the ultra-high tariffs rarely come into force. But in July 2025, with U.S. producers ramping up shipments and exceeding the legally permitted quota, Ottawa responded with a swift activation of its penalty tariffs, an economic sledgehammer that saw over 200 containers of American cheese, butter, and milk promptly blocked at the Canadian border, then sent back to the U.S. as unsellable commercial waste. These rejected shipments, many reportedly aging or near expiry and already spurned by other foreign markets, flooded back into the U.S. supply chain. Suddenly, major U.S. retailers like Walmart, Target, and Kroger found themselves awash in discount-labeled cheese and dairy, inventory that was never intended for domestic shelves at scale, often with little transparency around its origin or quality. Unsold surplus created a chain reaction, with cold storage at capacity and processors unwilling to accept more milk. Desperate Wisconsin and Midwest dairy farmers had little choice but to literally pour unsold milk down the drain. The market collapse was swift. Dairy prices plunged, hundreds of farms shuttered, and financial losses for the industry began to mount. Experts forecasting U.S. dairy could face up to $7 billion in losses before year's end. The repercussions hitting small farms and rural communities the hardest. The crisis at home was exacerbated by Canada's strict supply management system, which has operated since the 1960s. Canadian dairy is tightly policed. RBST growth hormones and antibiotics are banned. Milk batches are routinely tested for contaminants, and farm-to-store traceability is the norm. In contrast, U.S. cheese being dumped at deep discounts may not meet these international benchmarks, a fact that undermines both consumer confidence and public trust. American families ages 21 to 54 scanning supermarket aisles for bargains often have no idea they're purchasing near-expiry goods rejected by multiple countries. There are no warning labels. Retailers are not required to disclose the history or quality of this flood of rebranded dairy stock. Behind the scenes, U.S. dairy giants and cooperatives grappling with mounting losses and overflowed inventories have pleaded with the White House for intervention, but so far received only vague assurances and no concrete action plan. The tone from Washington has remained eerily silent. Even as the National Milk Producers Federation warns that, without massive stimulus or a restructured supply chain, America's dairy industry risks a devastating collapse within a year. Meanwhile, the fallout is not contained to North America. As Canada enforces its rules and resists American pressure, other global partners, most notably the European Union, Japan, and Australia, are also reviewing their dairy import policies. The European Commission has already signaled that over $28 billion in U.S. agricultural exports, including dairy, are now at risk of being hit in response to ongoing American dumping and tariff brinkmanship. This signals a possible new era for American agriculture, one defined not by market expansion but by increasing trade isolation, even from historic allies. The unraveling of the U.S. dairy industry amid these tariff disputes exposes a deeply troubling fragility embedded within America's agricultural supply chains. One of the most profound impacts has been on small and medium-sized farmers, particularly in dairy heartlands like Wisconsin and California. Once thriving hubs of production, these regions are now witnessing an alarming wave of farm closures. The stark contrast between Canadian supply management and American market dynamics further highlights the scale of the problem. Canada's well-entrenched dairy system prioritizes quality, safety, and environmental stewardship through strict regulation. Meanwhile, the U.S. dairy industry operates under a largely market-driven model, marked by fierce competition and volatile prices susceptible to dramatic swings from trade conflicts. Despite the severity of the crisis, the White House's silence has been deafening. While producers and industry groups have issued repeated calls for federal intervention, official responses remain muted. For consumers across the U.S., the ongoing glut of discounted dairy products may seem like temporary relief, but it masks a troubling undermining of food system integrity. In the farms and towns where milk has traditionally been a lifeblood, the consequences are deeply felt on a human level. The unfolding dairy crisis presents a test of governance, resilience, and trust, a crucible for federal leadership and the future trajectory of American agriculture. Any sustainable recovery must address structural reforms. The laissez-faire, market-driven nature of the U.S. dairy sector has proven vulnerable to shocks exacerbated by trade tensions. Implementation of strict labeling rules and robust regulatory oversight could restore confidence, ensuring that domestic markets are not seen as a dumping ground for displaced international inventory. On the trade front, diplomacy and negotiation are critical. A renewed commitment to fair, enforceable trade agreements could diffuse tensions, minimizing the risk of escalated retaliation. For American families, the crisis is felt most intimately at the dinner table, in supermarket aisles where price cuts may momentarily delight, but also sow confusion and doubt about food safety. The dairy industry symbolizes a broader struggle over identity, sustainability, and economic fairness in America's heartland. As the tariff saga continues to unfold, the eyes of the nation remain fixed on Washington and Ottawa. The resolution of this conflict will shape the future of American dairy, defining not just trade policy, but the broader relationship between government, industry, and citizens. In the end, the dairy tariff conflict is so much more than a trade skirmish. It is about safeguarding livelihoods, ensuring food quality, and preserving the confidence that binds producers and consumers across borders.